Hello, Oggies Worldwide. I'm KE0OG, Dave Kassler, here with another episode of Ask Dave, and with me is Trevor, our summertime Ask Dave editor, who is a third-year film student at BYU, which I'm assuming you're enjoying.
Yes.
Yes,
very
good.
much.
Good. All right, we're going to do another Ask Dave special on antennas, and Trevor has picked out and ordered the questions, so we'll see what we're going to be looking at here. What have we got?
All right, so we have someone, John from Tucson, is asking about the Gap Challenger vertical, and he wants to know what your opinion on that is.
He mentioned that somebody has one for $50, which is a lot less than the original cost. A lot of the companies that make these antennas will sell any part that's associated with it. So contact gap for the missing part. It's the center insulator balance. I'd say yes, that's indeed a gap. I have not used one. I've heard reasonably good things about them. If you're looking at verticals and you want the kind of vertical where you don't have to have radials, you might want to take a look at some of the Cushcraft antennas also, although they're far more expensive than this $50 from your friend there. The Gap Challenger vertical at $50 is probably a lot better deal than paying $500 or $600 for a new Cushcraft. So go ahead with the Gap, get it fixed up, be prepared to have to replace other parts on the antenna. Make sure that it matches the instruction manual very carefully. If you can't get the instruction manual with the antenna, by all means check on the Gap website, and in fact you may find that there's a newer manual for an older antenna that's got some newer ways of setting it up. So,
All right, Wade, call sign KM6KRE, wants to know if you have a recommendation on a hardline cable to purchase.
well, his problem is he needs to run 300 feet of coax from the station to a dipole. And I'm going to give an answer. It depends. It depends on the frequency. If you're trying to do 2 meters or something like that, you're going to find that 300 feet of any kind of coax is too long. If you're going to do 80, 40, and 20, something like that, you might try times microwave LMR 400, or just get some RG213. I don't think I'd go with RG8X on that because that is quite a bit of a long run. Yes, there is hardline cable, but at the lower HF frequencies, that is overkill. If you look at the number of dB lost per 100 feet of coax, a table you can find in the handbook or online, you'll find that you're not going to lose that much, especially if you're going to be running a 1 kilowatt amp. So 300 feet of RG213, be prepared for the fact that it's just a titch over $1 a foot. So it's not a cheap proposition, but it will get you out and on the air.
All right, Steve, call sign KCTNBM, needs help mounting an antenna to a tree.
Well, Steve, you've got a 2-meter J-pole antenna. Now, this is a nice follow-on to the last question. Because 2 meters, you really don't want your coax to be all that long. What I just said about HF antenna losses and coax does not apply at VHF, where the losses are actually quite high. The idea is to get it as high as you can, as close as you can to your shack. If you can keep the coax length under 25 feet, you're probably doing okay. You might even be able to get away with RG8X. But if you're going to go any further, any longer, you probably want RG213 or something like that. And I still wouldn't go over 100 feet. I mean, you lose half your signal at that point. So with regard to putting the antenna in a tree, trees are kind of vertically polarized, so it will damp your signal down a little bit. The side of the slide might be a better thing. Just, I don't know, hose clamp, cable clamp, something like that is what I usually do for something that's of that nature. I have to make something. Alrighty.
All right. Earl, call sign N6FXB, is needing some help with driving an antenna.
Driving an antenna. Right now, driving the antenna is the problem. We need a way to feed a balanced 600 ohm antenna with 75 or 50 ohm coax. That's what a delta, what a balun is for, can do that. Looking at a delta match, open wire tapering so that F0, he's got here, ohms, so that 0 ohms at the feed becomes 600 ohms at the antenna. F, that's close to the 5 on a typewriter. So he means 50 ohms at the feed becomes 600 ohms at the antenna. I'd look at a balun. It would be a 12 to 1, no, let's see, 600 divided by 50 is 12. Okay, so you're looking at a 12 to 1 balun if you can find something like that, or at least a 9 to 1. The delta match, you can get the dimensions for that in the antenna handbook by the ARRL. You might look online for a delta match designer. I don't know that you're going to find anything, but you might. The eventual operation will be a reentrant rhombus, several to many octaves of bandwidth. Yes, you can do that with a rhombic easily. So the feeding, usually when you feed like this, you run the open wire line all the way back as close to the shack as you can get, and then do your balun there. A lot of antenna tuners have a balanced output, although that's usually only a 4 to 1 balun in there, but you can compensate by tuning around it. So I would run open wire line out to your antenna if you can. Open wire line, I believe, is actually a bit less expensive than regular coax, so you're in good shape there. You may find that if you bring the open wire line all the way back into the shack that you're going to get some RFI. If you find that you do that, you may have to run coax partway to a balun, and then you can just take the 600 the rest of the way. Note that 600 is the wider line. It has spacers every so often. That's real, genuine open wire line. The window line is 450 ohms. A twin lead is 300 ohms. So take your pick, and you're going to be doing some experimentation because the antenna is affected by its location, wherever you might happen to be. Okay.
All right, another driving question. This time he's driving a rod into rock using multiple rods. And this is from Richard, call sign KG5WKO.
Okay. Different kind of driving here. Yeah, it's putting a, trying to drive a ground rod where there's a massive rock layer 4 feet in. We tried to drill pounder and the rod bent. Ooh, ah. Can we compensate by driving multiple rods and strapping them together and then attaching to rigs? The answer is yes, but. Yes, you certainly can, but you should not put them right next to each other, because when you do that, they act as one ground rod. So if you're going to put a 4-foot ground rod in, then it's going to act as a 4-foot ground rod, even if there are several that are right next to it. Put them about 6 to 8 feet apart, and then they'll act as multiple ground rods. So you put one in here, one over here, and then tie them together. And bond them together in a triangle or in a star pattern, whichever happens to work for you. You should use about number 6 wire, usually bare, available at Home Depot, to bond them together, and do bond them together really well. Another option is, if you can't put the ground rod vertical, put it horizontally. bury it. Dig a trench, put the ground rod in horizontally, and bury it with 2 or 3 feet of earth, and that will work as well. Of course, then you need to run a lead up to the surface, and you probably want to use that self-bonding material to actually weld the connection that's down below the earth. That's a little bit harder. I've never actually used that stuff, but I hear that it works really well. So for your underground stuff, a hose clamp will eventually deteriorate. So G5, that's Texas. Well, Texas has quite a variety of climates there, so and they build a ground rod into the house for green wire ground. No, I wouldn't use that. That's your utility ground. However, do bond your signal ground to the utility ground, again with the number 6 wire going from your signal ground to your utility ground. Hope that helps.
All right. Vernon, call sign W7VPL, is wondering if there's a way to correct his Diamond BB7V antenna.
Not performing well, not satisfied with its performance. Well, there are 2 answers to that. One of them is to try a different antenna, and the other is to get it higher. Put it up higher in the air. If you're already pretty high in the air, you might be getting the maximum performance out of it you can. Another thing that you can look at if it's too high in the air is the length of the coax. If the coax is too long, it will diminish performance both on transmit and on receive. So try moving it higher if you can. You may need to change the coax. And if the coax is too long already, actually moving it lower with a shorter coax might actually improve what you're doing. The optimum height for an antenna is a half wave, which on 2 meters is only 1 meter. So if you put the antenna up higher in the air, you're going to have a multiple lobe vertical pattern. If you get it high enough up in the air, those kind of all merge back into one. That's called a free space look at the antenna, and you'll get a reasonably good pattern. But again, check the coax, compute the losses in the coax. Remember that you're getting losses on receive too, so that could be part of the problem.
All right. Rick, call sign KN4LPV, needs help stringing wire on his antenna.
Well, I have room on the property for a long dipole. The issue is that the property slopes about 15 to 20 feet over a 100-foot run. So do I string the wire to be parallel with the earth or parallel with the sloping land? The easy answer is parallel with the earth. In other words, parallel with the horizon, flat like that. Now with the ground sloping like that, you're going to get a little bit favoring propagation in the direction of the slope. Not too bad. Now if you slope it with the land, you will get a pronounced propagation peak in the direction of the slope. So either way will work, but just remember that you're going to have a bit of a bias in the direction of the slope either way. But I would go for level if you can. If you can. If that becomes unreasonable, then just go with the slope.
All right. Dennis W8ITC has a question about the length of the coax he should use, just the average acceptable length.
There's an old joke where a new ham asks, how long should my coax be? And the old ham responds, long enough to get to the antenna. That's just a joke. I mean, clearly you've got to do that. The length of the coax plays into signal loss going out, but how much in true power out? identically the same. So if you have 1.2 dB loss in a piece of coax, you're going to have 1.2 dB loss in the amount of power that goes out of the antenna. Have I ever done any tests with some of the common coax at different lengths to the antenna? Well, that's what happens. I mean, it's a very simple engineering thing. You look at the length of the coax, you can look in the table for that particular coax and find out the loss per 100 feet. So if it's a 50-foot antenna, it will have half that loss in dB. So if there's a 3 dB loss at 100 feet, it'll be 1.5 at 50 dB. It's funny how it's linear like that, but that's the way dB work out. So if you had a 200 foot, you'd have a 6 dB loss. What is the average run? Well, the problem is a lot of hams forget that to get from their rig to outside may involve a rather convoluted path. And I recommend you go from your rig to a lightning arrestor and then to your antenna. And that adds even more coax, but at the benefit of giving you a little bit more protection in what you're doing. So, you know, if you can get there in 100 feet, it depends on where your antenna is. There are no reasons to avoid any particular length except maybe multiples of a quarter wavelength, but that again is a little harder to do. A quarter wavelength becomes a half wavelength if you double the frequency. So I'll just put it in, and if it's too long, if the dB loss is more than a couple dB, I would say go to a thicker coax. So if you're using RG8X or RG58, you might want to go to RG213 or LMR 400, RG8U, if you can get it anymore. Also, if you go even longer than that, you get into some really expensive cables. It would be easier just to move the antenna closer to the house. It is a trade-off. There are losses in coax and gain in your antenna, which is more important, because you lose in the coax both on transmit and receive, whereas the antenna itself, if it has gain and you've got it tuned right, you get the gain that comes out of that, like a double bazooka or something like that.
All right, John asks about his elements, whether or not he should mount horizontally or vertically.
Well, here's a question with a simple answer. He has a UHF Yagi out of some scraps. SWR is good at 1.2. He should mount it vertically if he's using FM, and horizontally for what's called weak signal work on UHF, which would be single sideband CW meteor scatter, So if it's FM, which I suspect it might be for, you want to go with vertical polarization, mount the antenna vertically like this. Now on HF, I know you didn't ask about HF, but on HF, the thing we want to look at is which is a better polarization for where you are. If you are in a place where you can get low takeoff angle with the vertical, that's great, better for DX. If you're going to be doing NVIS for close-in communications, it's near vertical incidence skywave propagation. Got that?
Yep.
Okay, good. If you're doing NVIS, then you'll want a horizontally polarized antenna. But on HF, the polarization doesn't much matter, because before the signal gets away from the antenna, it splits into two signals, one circularly polarized one way, one circularly polarized the other way. And those signals have names, and they have to do with how things propagate and so on. It gets weird and wonderful when you're doing that. But FM vertical, everything else horizontal. Okay, that looks like the end of this question set. It brings us to the end of another Ask Dave session. You can ask your questions by going to my website at dcasler.com/ask-dave, or just simply sending an email to hamradioanswers@gmail.com. And those emails go to Trevor, who sorts them out and puts them in the right place, and we'll address them in an upcoming video. So keep those cards and letters coming, folks. And also, please take a look at dcasler.com/support for ways that you can support this channel. Much appreciated. There's a tip jar there. It's interesting, I'll just mention this. There's a $2 bill right here in the front of the tip jar. And so somebody sent me a $20 tip consisting of 10 $2 bills. I thought it was really cool. They were in serial number order and brand new. By the way, $2 bills are readily available. You can go to any bank and get them. So that brings us to the end of another video. I'm going to say to all of you 73, until we next meet,